As you lie down and let the world outside fade away, listen to this story that begins with an unlikely meeting and ends where fate never dared to dream. The red-eye flight to Las Vegas hummed with the quiet desperation of people running towards something or away from everything. Sofia Martinez clutched her boarding pass with trembling fingers, the paper damp from her sweaty palms. 23 years old and already drowning in debt. She was betting her last $300 on a job interview that might not even exist. The plane was nearly empty at this ungodly hour. Just a handful of passengers scattered across the cabin like forgotten prayers. Sofia stumbled down the narrow aisle, her second-hand heels clicking against the floor, searching for seat 12A. Her stomach growled audibly, a harsh reminder that she'd skipped dinner to afford the flight. She found her row and froze. In seat 12B sat the most dangerously beautiful man she'd ever seen. Even in the dim cabin lighting, he commanded attention like a storm commands the sky. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and predatory grace. His suit probably cost more than her annual rent, the fabric hugging his broad shoulders with expensive precision, but it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Steel gray, cold as winter morning, they looked up from his phone and fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. This wasn't a man who asked for anything. He simply took what he wanted. "Excuse me," Sofia whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's drone. She gestured toward the window seat. Try not to stare at the way his shirt stretched across his chest. He stood without a word, and dear God, he was tall, at least 6'3" of pure masculine power, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. The scent hit her as she squeezed past him, expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more primal, something that made her pulse race and her mouth go dry. Their bodies brushed for just a moment, his chest against her back, and Sofia felt a shock of electricity shoot straight through her core. She practically fell into her seat, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and something else entirely. The stranger settled back into his seat with fluid elegance, returning to his phone as if she didn't exist. But Sofia could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. The armrest between them seemed both too wide and not nearly wide enough. As the plane taxied down the runway, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She'd worked a double shift at the diner, then rushed home to pack, then caught 3 different buses to reach the airport. Her eyelids felt like they were made of lead, her body aching from months of surviving on coffee and determination. The plane lifted into the night sky, and Sofia tried to focus on the lights of the city falling away below. But her mysterious seatmate's presence was overwhelming, magnetic in a way that made her hyper-aware of every breath, every slight movement. "Rough day." His voice was like aged whiskey, smooth and burning all at once. Sofia turned to find those penetrating gray eyes studying her face. Up close, she could see the slight stubble along his jaw, the way his lips curved with what might have been amusement. Something like that, she managed, her voice embarrassingly breathy. "Let me guess, running away from something or chasing a dream?" The question was too personal, too perceptive. "Both," she admitted before she could stop herself. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. The most dangerous combination. They fell into silence, but it was charged now, crackling with unspoken possibilities. Sofia tried to stay awake, tried to maintain some semblance of composure, but her body had other plans. The gentle vibration of the plane, combined with his overwhelming presence and her bone-deep exhaustion, was a lullaby she couldn't resist. Her eyelids fluttered closed despite her best efforts. She was dimly aware of swaying slightly, her head growing heavy. The last thing she remembered was the scent of expensive cologne and the warmth of something solid and reassuring. When consciousness began to return hours later, Sofia became aware of several things at once. She was warm, incredibly comfortable, and there was a hand, large, strong, unmistakably masculine, resting gently on her arm. Her cheek was pressed against something firm and warm that rose and fell with steady breathing. Oh, God! She was sleeping on his shoulder. Panic shot through her, but before she could jerk away, that whiskey voice rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her cheek. "Easy, Sleeping Beauty. We're landing soon." His voice was different now. Softer somehow, though still carrying that dangerous edge that made her stomach flutter. Sophia forced herself to lift her head, immediately missing the warmth and security of his shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, mortified. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." His eyes met hers, and there was something new there, something that made her heart race. "You looked like you needed the rest." The plane was descending now, the lights of Las Vegas spreading out below them like a glittering promise. But Sophia couldn't look away from his face, from the way his gaze seemed to see straight through to her soul. "I don't even know your name," she breathed. His smile was slow, predatory, absolutely devastating. "Marco," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Marco Salvatore." "Sophia," she managed, though her name sounded foreign on her lips. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. His finger traced along her jaw, just barely touching, but the contact burned like fire. "Tell me, Sophia, do you believe in fate?" Before she could answer, the plane touched down with a gentle bump, and the spell was broken. But as they gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, Sophia could feel something had fundamentally changed. The air between them crackled with possibility, with danger, with the kind of attraction that could either save her or destroy her completely. Marco stood and offered her his hand, and when she took it, she felt like she was stepping off the edge of a cliff into free fall. She had no idea that by morning she'd be wearing his ring. Consciousness returned to Sophia like surfacing from deep water, slow and disorienting. Her head pounded with the rhythm of a bass drum, and her mouth felt like she'd been chewing cotton. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains, casting golden rectangles across silk sheets that definitely weren't from her threadbare apartment. Where the hell was she? She sat up slowly, the room spinning slightly as she tried to focus. This wasn't a hotel room. It was a penthouse suite, all marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Las Vegas Strip in the harsh light of morning. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and everything screamed money. Serious money. Her heart stopped when she looked down at her left hand. A wedding ring, platinum, with a diamond so large it could fund a small country. The wave it felt alien on her finger, like wearing someone else's life. "What the fuck?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Good morning, Mrs. Salvatore." Sophia spun toward the voice, the sheet clutched to her chest. Marco stood in the doorway, devastatingly handsome even at what had to be 10 in the morning. He was shirtless, wearing only black silk pajama pants that hung low on his hips, revealing a torso that looked like it had been carved by a very horny Renaissance sculptor. Dark hair dusted his chest, trailing down in a line that made her mouth water despite her panic. But it was the wedding ring on his finger that made her world tilt. "Mrs. Salvatore?" she repeated, her voice climbing an octave. "What the hell does that mean?" Marco moved toward her with that predatory grace she remembered from the plane, carrying a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. "It means, my beautiful wife, that we had quite the evening." "Wife?" The word came out as a squeak. "I'm not your wife. I don't even know you." He set the coffee on the nightstand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely male. "The marriage certificate would disagree with you." "Marriage certificate?" Sophia's head was spinning, and not just from what had to be the worst hangover in human history. "Show me." Marco reached into the drawer of the nightstand and produced an official-looking document. There, in black and white, were their names. Sophia Elena Martinez and Marco Antonio Salvatore, married at the Chapel of Eternal Love at 3:47 a.m. Her signature was at the bottom, slightly wobbly but undeniably hers. "This isn't possible," she whispered, staring at the paper like it might burst into flames. "I don't remember any of this." "You don't remember?" Marco's voice was amused, dark honey over steel. "You don't remember Casino? The champagne? The way you looked at me when I kissed you at the altar?" Flashes came back to her then, fragmented and hazy like pieces of a broken mirror. The airport bar where they'd gone for just one drink, while waiting for her connecting flight. Champagne that tasted like starlight. His hand on her lower back, possessive and warm. Neon lights blurring past as they stumbled through the strip, her high heels clicking against concrete. The chapel. God. The tacky chapel with its plastic flowers and Elvis impersonator. Marco's eyes never leaving hers as he slipped the ring on her finger. The kiss that had made her forget her own name. "Oh, God," she breathed, covering her face with her hands. "Oh, God, what did we do?" "We got married." His voice was matter-of-fact, but when she looked up, there was something darker in his eyes, something that made heat pool low in her belly despite the circumstances. "And judging by the state of your dress, when I peeled it off you, we consummated it quite thoroughly." Sophia's cheeks burned. She looked around frantically and spotted her interview dress crumpled on the floor near the bathroom door. The zipper was broken, the fabric torn in places that suggested it had been removed with considerable enthusiasm. More memories flooded back. His hands on her skin, hot and demanding. The way he'd whisper her name against her throat like a prayer. The feel of his mouth on hers, consuming her like she was oxygen, and he was drowning. "This is insane," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We were drunk. This doesn't count. We can get it annulled." "Can we?" Marco sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "Are you so sure you want to?" "Of course I want to." But even as she said it, her treacherous body was responding to his proximity. The heat radiating from his skin, the way his muscles flexed as he reached for his coffee cup, the memory of how those hands had felt on her body. Your mouth says one thing, but your body says another. His voice dropped to that whiskey timbre that made her knees weak. Your pulse is racing. Your pupils are dilated. And you're looking at me like you want to find out if last night was as good as you remember. "You're delusional," she said, but her voice was breathless. "Am I?" In one fluid movement. He was leaning over her, his hands braced on either side of her head, caging her in. His scent surrounded her, making her dizzy with want. "Tell me you don't remember how you screamed my name. Tell me you don't remember begging me to never stop." Heat flooded through her, and she could feel herself getting wet despite every rational thought in her head. This was crazy. This was dangerous. This was the kind of mistake that ruined lives. But God help her, she wanted him. "Let me up," she whispered, though she made no move to push him away. In a moment, his lips were inches from hers now, his breath warm against her skin. "But first, let me remind you why you married me." His mouth covered hers before she could protest, and it was like being struck by lightning. The kiss was demanding, consuming, filled with a hunger that made her forget everything else. She could taste coffee on his tongue, could feel the slight roughness of his morning stubble against her skin. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "Now tell me you want an annulment," he said, his voice rough with desire. Sophia stared up at him, her mind reeling. This was insane. She barely knew him, but her body was singing, every nerve ending a lie with the memory of his touch. "I need to think," she whispered. Marco smiled, slow and predatory. "Think all you want, Mrs. Salvatore. But remember, you're mine now, and I take very good care of what belongs to me." 2 hours later, Sophia sat across from Marco in the penthouse's dining room, trying to process the magnitude of her situation. She'd showered and borrowed one of his shirts, a crisp white button-down that fell mid-thigh and smelled intoxicatingly of his cologne. Every movement reminded her of his presence, of the way the fabric had felt against his skin. Marco had prepared breakfast himself, which somehow made him even more dangerous. Watching those strong hands crack eggs and flip pancakes with practiced ease had sent her imagination spiraling into very inappropriate territory. Now he sat across from her, fully dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that made his eyes look like storm clouds, calmly eating, as if they discussed accidental marriages over breakfast every day. "So," Sophia said, stabbing at her pancakes with more force than necessary, "when exactly do we get this annulled?" Marco's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Who says we're getting annulled? Are you serious right now?" She set down her fork, staring at him incredulously. "We don't even know each other. This whole thing is insane." "Is it?" Marco leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Tell me, Sophia, what were you running to Vegas for?" The question caught her off guard. "A job interview." Not that it matters now, since I missed it. What kind of job? Waitressing at some high-end restaurant. The pay was supposed to be good enough to help me catch up on. She trailed off, not wanting to admit just how desperate her financial situation was. Your debt, Marco finished softly. How much do you owe? Heat flooded her cheeks. That's none of your business. You're my wife. Everything about you is my business now. His voice carried that edge of authority that made her stomach flutter with unwanted excitement. How much, Sophia? 37,000, she whispered, the number sounding even more devastating spoken aloud. Student loans, medical bills from when my mom was sick, credit cards I maxed out trying to keep us afloat. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. That's nothing. Nothing? Sophia's voice cracked. It's everything to me. It's been crushing me for 2 years. Pocket change, Marco said dismissively, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a platinum credit card and slid it across the table. Consider it handled. Sophia stared at the card, like it might bite her. I can't accept that. You can and you will. Marco's voice brooked no argument. You're a Salvatore now. Salvatores don't worry about money. I'm not really a Salvatore, she protested, but her fingers itched to touch the card. Freedom from debt, from the crushing weight of financial desperation. It was right there within reach. The marriage certificate suggests otherwise. Marco stood and moved around a table with predatory grace, stopping beside her chair. His hand settled on her shoulder, thumb tracing patterns against the collar of his shirt. Let me make you a proposition, beautiful. The endearment sent heat spiraling through her core. I'm listening. Stay married to me for 1 year. Play the role of my devoted wife. In return, I'll pay off every penny of your debt, set you up in a beautiful apartment, give you an allowance that would make most people weep with gratitude. Sophia tilted her head back to look at him, tried to ignore the way his touch was making her pulse race. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Marco's smile was slow, predatory, absolutely devastating. A beautiful woman on my arm, someone to warm my bed, and... His voice dropped to that whiskey timbre that made her knees weak. Someone to help me with certain business situations where having a wife would be advantageous. What kind of business? Something in his tone made alarm bells ring in her head. Import and export. Family business. Very traditional, very old-fashioned. The kind where having a stable wife improves one's reputation considerably. There was something he wasn't telling her. Something important. But the weight of her debt, the memory of empty cupboards and past due notices, made it hard to think clearly. And after a year, we part ways amicably. You'll have enough money to start over anywhere you want, do anything you want. Consider it a very generous salary for services rendered. Services rendered? Her voice came out breathier than she intended. Marco leaned down, his lips nearly brushing her ear. Being my wife in every sense of the word. Sophia. Sharing my bed. Letting me touch you, taste you, make you scream my name like you did last night. Heat pooled between her thighs at his words. At the memory they conjured, she could feel his breath against her neck, could smell his intoxicating scent. This was dangerous territory, but her body was singing with want. I need to think about it, she whispered. Of course you do. His hand slid from her shoulder to her throat, fingers resting lightly against her racing pulse. But while you're thinking, let me show you what you'd be giving up if you walk away. Before she could protest, Marco pulled her to her feet and backed her against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the strip. The morning sun streamed through the glass, warming her skin as he pressed his body against hers, pinning her in place. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her lips, his hands braced on either side of her head. Stop, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Liar. His mouth captured hers in a kiss that was pure fire, demanding and consuming. She could taste coffee on his tongue, could feel the hard planes of his chest pressed against her breasts. When his teeth caught her lower lip, she moaned involuntarily. Marco's hand slid down her body, tracing the curve of her waist, the flare of her hip. When his fingers found the hem of the shirt she wore, she gasped against his mouth. So responsive, he murmured, his hand sliding beneath the fabric to trace patterns on her bare thigh. I remember how you felt last night, Sophia. How wet you were. How perfectly you fit around me. Marco, she breathed, her hands fisting in his suit jacket. Say yes, he whispered, his fingers tracing higher, closer to where she needed him most. Say you'll be mine for a year, and I'll make you feel things you didn't even know were possible. Sophia was drowning in sensation, in the heat of his body and the skilled touch of his hands. Every rational thought was fleeing her head, replaced by pure want. The money, she managed to say. How do I know you actually have it? Marco's smile was wicked. Look around, beautiful. This penthouse costs more per month than most people make in a year. The suit I'm wearing costs more than your rent. The ring on your finger could buy a house. He was right, of course. Everything about him screamed wealth, power, the kind of money that could solve all her problems with the stroke of a pen. And if I say no, then I'll have the marriage annulled, and you'll go back to your life of working 3 jobs and eating ramen for dinner. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his touch was anything but casual as his fingers traced the edge of her panties. Is that really what you want, Sophia? To struggle for the rest of your life, when paradise is right here within reach? She closed her eyes, trying to think past the sensation of his hands on her body. A year, 1 year of luxury, of being desired by this incredible man, of never having to worry about money again. What was a year in exchange for freedom? I need conditions, she said finally. Name them. I want the debt paid off up front. And I want a contract, something legal that guarantees the money at the end. Done. His fingers pressed more firmly against her, making her gasp. Anything else? I want to know what I'm really getting into. Your business, your family, everything. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face. Some things are better learned gradually, beautiful. But I promise you this, as long as you're mine, no one will ever hurt you. I protect what belongs to me. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her core. When had anyone ever wanted to protect her? When had anyone ever looked at her like she was precious, valuable, worth fighting for? Say yes, Sophia, Marco whispered, his mouth moving against her throat. Let me take care of you. Let me give you everything you've ever wanted. Looking into his storm-gray eyes, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. Sophia made a decision that would change everything. Yes, she breathed. I'll do it. I'll be your wife. Marco's smile was triumphant, predatory, absolutely devastating. Good girl. Now let me remind you exactly what you've agreed to. His mouth crashed down on hers, and Sophia knew there was no going back. 3 days later, Sophia found herself standing in the marble foyer of Marco's Manhattan penthouse, a world away from the glittering chaos of Las Vegas. The apartment was a testament to wealth and power. 20-foot ceilings, original artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses, and a view of Central Park that made her dizzy with its beauty. But it was the armed man in the expensive suit standing by the elevator that reminded her she'd stepped into something far more dangerous than a simple marriage of convenience. Mrs. Salvatore. The man nodded respectfully as she passed, his jacket bulging slightly where his gun rested. Mr. Salvatore asked me to inform you that your belongings have been placed in the master suite. Her belongings, all 2 suitcases worth of her pathetic possessions, now lost in a closet the size of her old apartment. The contrast was jarring, surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. Marco emerged from what appeared to be a home office. Phone pressed his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. Even in casual clothes, dark jeans that hugged his powerful thighs and a black cashmere sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders, he commanded attention. Every movement was calculated, predatory, radiating an authority that made her pulse quicken. "Si, capisco," he said into the phone, his voice hard as steel. "Handle it. Permanently." The tone sent a chill down Sophia's spine. There was something cold, dangerous in those words that made her question exactly what kind of business Marco was really in. He ended the call and turned to her, his expression softening instantly. It was like watching a mask slip into place, the dangerous man disappearing behind the facade of the devoted husband. "Forgive me, beautiful." Business never sleeps. He moved toward her with that predatory grace, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne. How do you like your new home? It's overwhelming, she admitted. Tried to ignore the way her body responded to his proximity. 3 days of marriage, and she still felt like a live wire whenever he was near. You'll get used to it. His hand settled on her lower back, possessive and warm. I've arranged for a stylist to come this afternoon. You'll need appropriate clothes for the events we'll be attending. Events? Dinner parties, charity galas, business functions. As my wife, you'll be expected to play a certain role. His fingers traced small circles against her spine through the thin fabric of her dress. Don't worry, I'll teach you everything you need to know. The condescension in his tone sparked her temper. I'm not some doll you can dress up and parade around. Marco's smile was sharp, dangerous. No, you're not. You're my wife. And my wife represents me in everything she does, everything she wears, everyone she speaks to. His hand slid up to cup the back of her neck, thumb tracing her pulse point. That means you belong to me, Sophia. Every breath, every heartbeat, every soft little moan you make in my bed. Heat flooded through her at his words, at the memory they conjured the past 3 nights. He'd been insatiable, taking her body with a skill and intensity that left her trembling and desperate for more. Even now, she could feel herself getting wet just from his touch. I need some air, she said breathlessly. Of course. Marco's smile was knowing, predatory. But first, there's someone I want you to meet. As if summoned, an older woman appeared from the kitchen, elegant, silver-haired, wearing a designer dress that screamed old money. Everything about her was perfectly polished, from her manicured nails to her cold, assessing gaze. Sophia, this is my mother, Elena Salvatore, Marco said, his hand still possessive on her neck. Mama, my beautiful wife. Elena's smile was arctic. So this is the little nobody who trapped my son into marriage. The words hit like a slap, but before Sophia could respond, Marco's voice cut through the air like a blade. Mama, you'll show my wife the respect she deserves, or you will leave my home. The older woman's eyes widened slightly, clearly not used to being spoken to that way. But something in Marco's tone, cold, absolute, dangerous, made her step back. Of course, Elena said stiffly. Welcome to the family, dear. The endearment dripped with false sweetness, but Sophia managed a polite smile. Thank you. Mama was just leaving, Marco said, his voice still carrying that edge of steel. Weren't you, Mama? Elena gathered her purse with wounded dignity. We'll speak later, Marco. When you're thinking more clearly. After she left, the tension in the room was suffocating. Marco's hand was still on Sophia's neck, his thumb tracing soothing patterns against her skin. I'm sorry about that, he said softly. She'll come around. Will she? Sophia turned to face him, searching his storm gray eyes. Marco, what exactly is your family business? Something flickered in his gaze. Caution, calculation, import and export, like I told you. Why? The armed guards, the way you spoke on the phone, your mother acting like I'm some kind of threat. She stepped closer, her hands resting on his chest. I'm not stupid, Marco. I know there's more to this. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his hands settling on her waist. Some things are better left unknown, beautiful. Trust me on this. But I need to know what I've got myself into. You've gotten yourself into a life of luxury with a man who worships your body every night, he said, his voice dropping to that whiskey timbre that made her knees weak. Isn't that enough? Before she could answer, his mouth was on hers, hot and demanding. The kiss was designed to distract, to make her forget her questions. And God help her, it was working. Her hands fisted in his sweater as he backed her against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. Marco, she gasped against his lips. That's right. Say my name, he murmured, his hand sliding down to cup her ass, lifting her slightly so she could feel the hard length of his erection against her core. Say it like you did last night when I made you come on my tongue. Heat spiraled through her at the memory. He'd spent hours worshiping her body, making her scream his name until she was hoarse. Even now, she could feel herself getting wet, her body responding to his touch despite her questions. "The staff," she whispered as his mouth moved to her throat. "They know better than to disturb us," Marco said against her skin, his hands already working at the zipper of her dress. "Besides, they work for me. They see nothing, hear nothing, remember nothing." The dress pulled around her feet, leaving her in nothing but black lace panties and a matching bra. Marco stepped back to look at her, his gray eyes dark with hunger. "Beautiful," he breathed, his hands tracing the curves of her body with reverent touches. So fucking perfect. Sophia should have been embarrassed, standing nearly naked in front of the windows where anyone could see. Instead, the danger, the possibility of being caught, only made her more aroused. "Someone could see," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Let them," Marco growled, dropping to his knees in front of her. "Let them see how my wife falls apart for me." His mouth was on her through the lace, hot and demanding. And Sophia cried out, her hands tangling in his dark hair. The contrast between his expensive clothes and her near nakedness, between his controlled movements and her desperate responses, was intoxicating. "Please," she gasped, not even sure what she was begging for. "Please, what?" Marco looked up at her, his lips glistening, his eyes dark with possession. "Tell me what you want, beautiful." "You," she breathed. "I want you." Marco's smile was triumphant as he stood, lifting her in his arms with effortless strength. "Then you'll have me. All of me. Every inch. Every breath. Every heartbeat." He carried her toward the bedroom, and Sophia let herself sink into the sensation, into the promise of pleasure that made everything else fade away. Questions could wait. Concerns about his business, his family, the dangerous edge that seemed to follow him everywhere. All of it could wait. Right now, there was only Marco, only the way he made her feel like she was the most precious thing in his world. Even if it was all an illusion, even if she was just playing a role, she could pretend for a little while longer that this was real, that she was more than just a convenient wife to a man whose secrets could destroy them both. But as Marco laid her down on silk sheets and began to worship her body with a skill that left her breathless, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was dancing on the edge of a knife, and sooner or later, she was going to cut herself. 2 weeks into their marriage, Sophia discovered that being Mrs. Marco's Salvador came with rules she'd never imagined. She couldn't leave the penthouse without an escort. Her phone calls were monitored, and certain rooms in their sprawling home were strictly off-limits, always locked, always guarded. It was the nightmares that finally broke her resolve to stay ignorant. She'd been jolted awake at 3 a.m. by Marco's torture cries, his powerful body thrashing against silk sheets soaked with sweat. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, she could see the scars she'd noticed before. Thin white lines across his chest and back that he dismissed as old accidents when she'd asked. But the name he'd screamed in his sleep, Vincent, suggested something far darker than accidents. Now she sat in the marble bathroom, watching Marco shave with steady hands that showed no trace of the terror she'd witnessed hours earlier. In the mirror, his gray eyes met hers, and she saw him rebuilding those walls, brick by careful brick. "You were having a nightmare," she said softly. Marco's razor paused against his jaw. "Was I don't remember. You called out someone's name. Vincent." The name hit him like a physical blow. The razor clattered into the sink, and for a moment, his mask slipped completely. She saw pain there, raw and devastating, before he turned away. "Vincent was my younger brother," Marco said quietly, his voice hollow. "He died 5 years ago." Sophia's heart clenched. "Marco, I'm sorry. I didn't know." He was 19. Marco's hands gripped the marble counter until his knuckles went white. 19 years old, and he thought he could handle himself in this world. Thought he was untouchable because he was a Salvatore. The anguish in his voice made her move toward him instinctively, her hands settling on his bare shoulders. She could feel the tension radiating from his muscles, could see the way his jaw clenched against whatever memories were playing in his mind. What happened to him? Marco met her eyes in the mirror, and the darkness she saw there made her breath catch. "He was taken by our enemies, tortured for 3 days while they sent me pieces of him." His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the storm raging beneath the surface. By the time I found him, he was begging me to end his suffering. Oh God, Marco. I held him while he died, Marco continued, as if he couldn't stop the words now that they'd started flowing. My baby brother, the one I'd sworn protect. And I had to watch him bleed out of my arms because I wasn't strong enough, wasn't careful enough, wasn't ruthless enough to keep him safe. Sophia's eyes filled with tears at the raw pain in his voice. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his shoulder blade. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm, could feel the slight tremor that ran through his powerful frame. It wasn't your fault, she whispered. Wasn't it? Marco turned in her arms, his hands framing her face with desperate intensity. I brought him into this life, Sophia. I made him a target the moment I took over the family business. What business, Marco? She asked gently. Please, just tell me the truth. Marco studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could handle whatever he was about to reveal. Finally, he sighed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. My family controls the East Coast import operations for certain specialized merchandise. Drugs, weapons, information. We've been doing it for 4 generations. The words hit her like ice water. You're in the Mafia. We prefer family business, Marco said with bitter humor. But yes, essentially. And Vincent wanted to prove himself, wanted to show he could be as ruthless as his big brother. So he went after the Torino family without authorization, without backup, without thinking about the consequences. Sophia's mind reeled. The armed guards, the locked rooms, the way people looked at Marco with mixture of respect and fear, it all made sense now. She'd married into organized crime. The men who took him, she said quietly. What happened to them? Marco's smile was cold, predatory, absolutely terrifying. I made sure they understood the price of touching Salvatore. Every single one of them begged for death by the end. A chill ran down her spine at the casual way he spoke about murder, about revenge. This was the man she shared a bed with, the man whose hands could be gentle as silk or deadly as steel. Are you afraid of me now? Marco asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sophia searched his face, looking past the dangerous exterior to the man beneath. Yes, he was capable of violence, a brutality that made her stomach turn. But she'd also seen him hold her like she was precious, seen him wake up screaming his brother's name, seen the way his hands shook when he talked about Vincent's death. I should be, she admitted, but I'm not. You should be, Marco said seriously. Being with me makes you a target, Sophia. There are people who would love nothing more than to hurt me through you. Is that why you married me? The question tumbled out before she could stop it. To have something to protect? Someone to care about? To replace Vincent? Marco's hands tightened on her face. I married you because from the moment you fell asleep on my shoulder, I knew I couldn't let you go. Vincent's death taught me that life is too short, too fragile, too fucking brutal to waste on half measures. His mouth crashed down on hers, desperate and demanding. She could taste the desperation on his tongue, could feel the way his hands trembled against her skin. This wasn't the controlled seduction he usually employed. This was raw need, the kind that came from staring death in the face and choosing to live anyway. I need you, he whispered against her lips, his voice breaking. God help me, Sophia, but I need you more than my next breath. She let him lift her onto the marble counter, let him spread her thighs and settle between them. The cool stone against her bare skin contrasted sharply with the heat radiating from his body, making her gasp. Then have me, she breathed, her hands tangling in his hair. All of me, Marco. I'm yours. His eyes blazed with possession, with something deeper and more dangerous than mere lust. Mine, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. No matter what happens, no matter what you learn about me, you're mine. And you're mine, she whispered back, surprised at herself at the fierce possessiveness in her own voice. All your darkness, all your demons. I want all of it. Marco's control shattered completely. His mouth found her throat, her collarbone, the sensitive spot just below her ear that made her arch against him. His hands were everywhere, worshiping her body with a reverence that bordered on worship. When he finally entered her, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. This wasn't just sex. This was confession, absolution, the kind of desperate connection that came from two damaged souls finding each other in the darkness. "I love you," Marco whispered against her neck, and the words hit her like a physical blow. "Marco, I know it's too soon. I know this whole thing is insane, but I love you, Sophia. I love your strength, your courage, the way you see past all the blood on my hands to the man underneath." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked into his storm-gray eyes. She could see the vulnerability there, the fear that she would reject him now that she knew the truth. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched his face transform with wonder. "Even knowing what I am, what I've done, especially knowing," she said fiercely, "you're not just a killer, Marco. You're a man who loved his brother enough to hold him while he died. A man who's strong enough to carry that guilt and still choose to love again." Marco's kiss was soft, reverent, filled with gratitude that made her heart ache. As their bodies moved together in the pre-dawn darkness, Sophia realized she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She was no longer just playing the role of his wife. She was falling into it, heart and soul, danger be damned. And as Marco whispered promises against her skin, promises to protect her, to cherish her, to love her until his last breath, Sophia prayed that love would be enough to keep them both alive in a world where trust was a luxury and mercy was a weakness neither of them could afford. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum was a display of wealth and power that took Sophia's breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over Manhattan's elite, their jewelry sparkling like captured starlight as they moved through marble halls filled with priceless art. But it was Marco who commanded every gaze in the room. He wore a custom black tuxedo that hugged his powerful frame like a second skin, the fabric emphasizing every hard line of muscle beneath. His dark hair was swept back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. And when he smiled, that dangerous, predatory smile that made her pulse race, she could see other women watching him with naked hunger. The emerald green gown he'd chosen for her was a masterpiece of seduction. Silk that flowed like water over her curves, cut low enough to showcase her breasts while maintaining an air of elegance. The slit that ran up her thigh flashed hints of smooth skin with every step, and she could feel the weight of admiring stares from every man in the room. But Marco's possessive hand at the small of her back made it clear she belonged to him alone. "You're staring," Sophia murmured as they moved through the crowd, nodding politely at the stream of politicians, business moguls, and socialites who approached them. "Can you blame me?" Marco's voice was rough silk in her ear. "You look like a fucking goddess tonight, Mrs. Salvatore. Every man in this room wants to strip that dress off you with his teeth." Heat pooled low in her belly at his words, at the possessive edge in his voice. "And what do you want to do?" His grip tightened on her waist, fingers digging into silk. "I want to take you into one of these empty galleries and fuck you against a priceless painting while you scream my name loud enough for everyone to hear who you belong to." Sophia's breath caught, her body responding instantly to the dark promise in his voice. The past month had taught her that Marco's appetite for her was insatiable, creative, and absolutely devastating to her self-control. "Behave," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Never," Marco murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Not when you look at me like that, like you want to drag you into the nearest dark corner and remind you exactly why you married me." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a man in an expensive suit whose smile didn't reach his cold blue eyes. Something about him made Sophia's skin crawl, though she couldn't pinpoint why. "Marco Salvatore," the man said, extending a manicured hand. "Vincent Torino. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." The name hit Marco like a physical blow. Sophia felt his entire body go rigid beside her, saw the way his face went perfectly blank, the mask he wore when he was at his most dangerous. "Torino," Marco's voice was arctic. "I wasn't aware rats were invited to events like this." Vincent's laugh was cultured, refined, and absolutely chilling. Now, Marco, that's no way to speak in front of your lovely wife." His gaze slid to Sophia with predatory interest. "You must be the famous Mrs. Salvatore. I've heard so much about you." The way he looked at her, like she was something to be consumed, made her step closer to Marco instinctively. His arm came around her waist immediately, protective and possessive. Sophia, This is Vincent Torino, Marco said carefully. His family has a long history with mine. The understatement was loaded with violence and threat. Sophia remembered what Marco had told her about Vincent, his brother's name, screamed in nightmare-haunted sleep. This was the man whose family had tortured and killed the boy Marco had loved more than life itself. It's so rare to see Marco genuinely happy, Vincent continued, his smile razor-sharp. Though I have to wonder how long such happiness can last in our world. Beautiful things are so fragile. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marco's hand moved to his jacket, and for a moment, Sophia was terrified he might pull a gun in the middle of the Metropolitan Museum. "If you'll excuse us," Marco said, his voice deadly calm, "my wife and I were just leaving." "Of course, but Marco..." Vincent's voice stopped them as they turned to go. "Give my regards to Vincent." "Oh, wait, you can't. My mistake." Sophia felt Marco's control snap like a breaking wire. The violence that radiated from him was so intense, she could almost taste it in the air. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually kill Vincent Torino right there among Manhattan's glittering elite. Instead, Marco smiled, the cold, predatory smile that preceded bloodshed. "Enjoy the evening, Torino, while you can." He guided Sophia through the crowd with barely contained violence, his grip on her waist tight enough to bruise. She could feel the rage pouring off him in waves, could see the way people instinctively stepped out of their path as they made their way to the exit. The ride home was silent, electric with tension. Marco sat beside her in the back of the limousine, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted on his thighs. Every line of his body screamed barely leash violence. "Marco," she said softly. "Not now, Sophia." But she could see the pain beneath the rage, could see the way Vincent Torino's casual cruelty had reopened wounds that might never fully heal. Without thinking, she moved closer, her hand covering his clenched fist. "He wanted to hurt you," she said quietly. "He wanted to make you lose control in front of all those people. He succeeded." Marco's voice was raw with self-recrimination. "I almost put a bullet in his head right there in the fucking Met. But you didn't. You protected me instead, got us out of there safely." Marco turned to look at her, and the anguish in his storm-gray eyes made her heart ache. "He threatened you, Sophia. He looked at you like..." His hands clenched tighter. "I should have killed him the moment he said Vincent's name." "And then what? Spend the rest of your life in prison? Leave me alone and unprotected?" Sophia shifted closer, her free hand cupping his face. "You did exactly what Vincent would have wanted you to do. You chose love over revenge." Something shifted in Marco's expression, the rage giving way to something deeper, more vulnerable. "You're not safe with me," he whispered. "Tonight, prove that. They'll use you against me, hurt you to get to me. Then protect me," Sophia said fiercely. "Fight for me. Choose me every single day, and I'll choose you right back." Marco stared at her for a long moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then his mouth was on hers, desperate and demanding, full of a hunger that went beyond mere physical need. By the time they reached the penthouse, they were both burning with a need that bordered on violence. Marco carried her from the elevator to their bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them with barely controlled force. "I need you," he said against her throat, his voice rough with desperation. "I need to feel you, taste you, know that you're mine and safe and here with me." "Then take me," Sophia breathed, her hands working at his tie, his jacket, desperate to feel his skin against hers. "All of me, Marco. Everything." He turned her around, his fingers finding the zipper of her gown with practiced ease. The silk pulled around her feet, leaving her in nothing but emerald lace that matched her dress and heels that made her legs look endless. Marco's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden quiet of the room. "Christ, Sophia, you're going to be the death of me." "Good," she said, turning to face him with a smile that was pure seduction. "I'd rather kill you with pleasure than let Vincent Torino do it with bullets." Marco's control shattered completely. His mouth crashed down on hers as his hands roamed her nearly naked body with desperate reverence. Every touch was worship and possession, claim and surrender all at once. When he lifted her onto their bed, his gray eyes burned with intensity that took her breath away. I love you, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I love you so much it terrifies me. Show me, Sophia whispered, arching beneath him as his mouth found her throat. Show me how much. What followed was acclaiming unlike anything they'd shared before. Marco worshipped her body with a desperation that bordered on religious fervor, his mouth and hands mapping every inch of her skin as if memorizing her for eternity. When he finally joined their bodies, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Mine, he whispered against her lips as they moved together in perfect rhythm. My wife, my salvation, my everything. Yours, she agreed, her nails digging into his shoulders as pleasure built between them like a gathering storm. Always yours, Marco. Forever. When release finally claimed them, it was with a shattering intensity that left them both gasping, clinging to each other like survivors of shipwreck. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled together in silk sheets, Sophia realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. This wasn't just physical anymore. This wasn't even just love. This was a claiming so complete, so absolute, that she knew she would never be whole without him again. No matter what happens, Marco murmured against her hair, no matter who tries to take you from me, I will burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you. Looking into his storm-gray eyes, Sophia believed him completely, and in that moment, she realized she would do exactly the same. The call came at dawn, shattering the peaceful quiet of their bedroom with its shrill urgency. Sophia felt Marco's body go rigid beside her before he rolled away to answer, his voice instantly alert despite having been deep in sleep moments before. Salvatore, he said curtly, and Sophia could hear the faint buzz of an agitated voice on the other end. Marco's face went pale, then deadly cold. When? A pause. How many? Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and was already moving, pulling on clothes with efficient practice movements. The transformation from loving husband to dangerous crime boss was swift and complete and made Sophia's blood run cold. What's wrong? She asked, sitting up and clutching the sheet to her chest. The warehouse on the docks was hit last night, Marco said without looking at her, strapping on a shoulder holster with movements that spoke of long practice. 3 of my men are dead, and they took someone. Who? Marco's jaw clenched. Tommy Castellano. He's just a kid. Sophia, 19 years old, started working for me last month. The same age Vincent had been when he died. Sophia could see the parallel wasn't lost on Marco. His hand shook slightly as he checked his weapon, and the muscle in his jaw was ticking with barely controlled rage. This is about last night, isn't it? She said quietly. Vincent Torino is sending you a message. He's declaring war, Marco corrected grimly. And he's using kids to do it just like before. Sophia slipped out of bed and moved toward him, wearing nothing but one of his shirts. Let me come with you. Absolutely not. Marco's voice was sharp, final. You stay here where it's safe. I've doubled the security. No one gets in or out without my authorization. Marco, please. No, Sophia. He turned to face her, and the cold fury in his storm-gray eyes made her step back. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. You stay here and you stay alive. That's an order. The word stung, reducing her from beloved wife to subordinate in the span of a heartbeat. I'm not one of your soldiers, Marco. No, you're something infinitely more precious, which is why you're staying the fuck away from this. He moved toward her, his hands framing her face with desperate intensity. I can't lose you, Sophia. I won't survive it. And I can't lose you either, she whispered, covering his hand with hers. What if this is a trap? What if Vincent is counting on you coming alone, angry, ready to make mistakes? Then I'll make them, Marco said simply, because the alternative is letting that kid die the way my brother did, and I won't live with that on my conscience. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, as if he was trying to memorize the taste of her lips. When he pulled away, his eyes were soft with love and hard with resolve. I love you, he said fiercely. Remember that no matter what happens. Remember that every choice I make, every breath I take, it's all for you. And then he was gone, leaving Sophia alone in their bedroom with the taste of goodbye on her lips and terror in her heart. Hours passed like centuries. Sophia paced the penthouse like a caged animal, every nerve ending screaming with tension. The guards posted throughout the apartment watched her with professional sympathy, but their presence only reminded her of how much danger Marco was walking into. When the call finally came, it wasn't Marco's voice on the other end. Mrs. Salvatore. Vincent Torino's cultured tones filled her ear, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Where's my husband? Safe for the moment, though I'm afraid the same can't be said for young Tommy. Your husband has quite the temper when properly motivated. What do you want? A trade, Vincent said simply. You for the boy, your husband for a chance to end this without any more unnecessary bloodshed. I'm listening. There's a warehouse in Queens, industrial district near the river. Come alone. No guard, no weapons, no tracking devices. You have 1 hour. And if I don't? Vincent's laugh was cold as winter wind. Then your husband will watch another 19-year-old boy die screaming, and this time it will be his fault. The choice is yours, Mrs. Salvatore. The line went dead. Sophia stared at the phone for a long moment, her mind racing. This was insane. This was suicide. Marco would never forgive her if she walked into Vincent's trap. But Tommy Castellano was just a kid, and Marco was already carrying too much guilt, too much pain. She couldn't let him watch another boy die, couldn't let him carry that weight for the rest of his life. Her decision made, Sophia moved quickly. She dressed in dark jeans and a black sweater, practical clothes that wouldn't restrict her movement. In Marco's study, she found the spare key to his gun safe, her hand steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. The pistol felt heavy and foreign in her hands, but Marco had taught her to shoot during their 3rd week of marriage. Just in case, he'd said, and she'd never imagined she'd need the skill so soon. Getting past the guards required creativity, and the kind of desperate cunning that came from having everything to lose. A fire alarm triggered by a carefully placed cigarette lighter created just enough chaos for her to slip out through the service elevator. The warehouse district was a maze of abandoned buildings and broken dreams, lit by stuttering streetlights and the distant glow of the city. Sophia found the address Vincent had given her, a massive concrete structure that looked like it hadn't seen legitimate use in decades. The door was unlocked, which should have been her first warning. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of shadows and rusted metal, lit by a few scattered work lights that created pools of harsh illumination in the surrounding darkness. And there, tied to a chair in the center of the space, was Marco. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, and his expensive suit was torn and dirty, but his eyes blazed with fury when he saw her. "Sophia, no," he said, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Get out of here. Now." How touching. Vincent Torino stepped out of the shadows, flanked by 4 armed men. True love conquering all. It's almost enough to make one believe in fairy tales. "Let them go," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You have me. That's what you wanted." "Oh, my dear naive girl," Vincent smiled, and it was like looking at a shark. "What I wanted was to destroy Marco Salvatore completely. And the best way to destroy a man like Marco is to make him watch the woman he loves die." The truth hit her like a physical blow. This was never about prisoner exchanges or ending wars. This was about revenge, pure and simple. Vincent wanted Marco to suffer the way he had when Marco killed his men, wanted him to carry the guilt of her death the way he carried Vincent's. "You sick fuck," Marco snarled, straining against his bonds. "This is between you and me. Leave her out of it." "But she's the point, don't you see?" Vincent moved closer to Sophia, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "You took my soldiers, my territory, my respect. So I'm going to take the only thing you actually care about." Sophia's hand moved to the gun concealed beneath her sweater. "The boy, where is he?" "Tommy? Oh, he's perfectly safe. I never had him." Amazing how a few screams over a phone line can motivate even the most rational man to make stupid decisions. Marco's roar of rage echoed through the warehouse, and Sophia saw red. This monster had manipulated them both, had played on Marco's trauma and guilt to draw them into his trap. "You made a mistake, Vincent," she said quietly. "Oh, and what was that?" Sophia smiled. It was every bit as cold and predatory as anything Marco had ever managed. You assumed I was helpless. The gun was in her hand and firing before Vincent could react. The shot echoing through the warehouse like thunder. He went down hard, clutching his shoulder and screaming curses that would have made a sailor blush. Chaos erupted. Vincent's men raised their weapons, but Sophia was already moving, using the darkness and confusion to her advantage. 2 more shots, 2 more men down, and then Marco was free somehow, his own gun appearing in his hand like magic. The remaining gunman didn't stand a chance. In the sudden silence that followed, Sophia found herself on her knees beside Vincent Torino, the gun pressed against his temple, while Marco secured the area. "Please," Vincent gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. "Please, I'll give you anything. Money, territory, information. There's only one thing I want from you," Sophia said softly, her voice deadly calm. "What?" She leaned close, her lips nearly brushing his ear. "I want you to remember that it was Marco Salvatore's wife who ended your pathetic little war. Remember that when you're rotting in whatever hole Marco decides to put you in." Marco appeared beside her, his eyes burning with pride and something deeper, more dangerous. "My beautiful, deadly wife," he murmured. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." As Vincent Torino was dragged away to face whatever justice Marco saw fit to dispense, Sophia finally allowed herself to collapse into her husband's arms. "Don't ever scare me like that again," Marco whispered against her hair, his voice shaking with relief and residual terror. "Don't give me a reason to," she whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence and the promise of retribution, Sophia knew that their love had been tested in fire and emerged stronger than ever. They were no longer just husband and wife. They were partners in every sense of the word, bonded by blood and battle, and a love that nothing could destroy. 3 months after Vincent Torino's defeat, Sophia thought they'd finally found peace. The other families had accepted Marco's dominance. Vincent was rotting in a private hell that Marco had crafted specifically for him, and their love had only grown stronger through adversity. She should have known that in Marco's world, peace was always temporary. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning, while Marco was in his study handling legitimate business calls. Sophia was in their bedroom, fresh from a shower, and wearing nothing but Marco's shirt when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In the distance, she could hear the staccato pop of gunfire, the shouts of Marco's security team, the sound of breaking glass. Someone had breached their fortress. Sophia's training kicked in immediately. In the months since the warehouse incident, Marco had insisted she learn proper combat skills from his best men. She was no longer the helpless girl who'd stumbled into his world. She was a Salvatore, and Salvatores knew how to fight. She grabbed the pistol from a nightstand, checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, and moved toward the bedroom door. The hallway beyond was empty, lit only by the pulsing red emergency lights that made everything look like a scene from hell. "Marco," she called softly but got no response. More gunfire erupted from the direction of the study, followed by a sound that made her blood run cold. Marco's voice raised in pain and fury. Someone had hurt her husband. Rage, pure and incandescent, flooded through her veins. These bastards had invaded their home, their sanctuary, and dared to hurt the man she loved more than life itself. They were about to learn why that was a fatal mistake. Sophia moved to the penthouse like a wraith, using every shadow, every piece of cover Marco's paranoid security measures provided. The gunmen, 6 of them that she could count, were professionals, but they'd made one crucial error. They'd underestimated Mrs. Marco Salvatore. The first man went down silently, Sophia's blade sliding between his ribs before he even knew she was there. She'd taken the knife from Marco's collection, and it felt natural in her hand, like an extension of her will. The second never saw her coming either. By the time she reached Marco's study, 4 men lay dead in her wake, and she was painted with their blood like some ancient goddess of war. The sight that greeted her when she peered around the doorframe made her see red. Marco was tied to his desk chair, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead and what looked like cigarette burns on his bare chest. His expensive shirt hung in tatters, and his gray eyes blazed with barely contained fury, despite his helpless position. Standing over him was a woman Sophia had never seen before, tall, blonde, beautiful in a cold, calculating way. She held a lit cigarette in one manicured hand and a gun in the other, and she was smiling with a kind of cruel satisfaction that made Sophia's trigger finger itch. "Where is she, Marco?" The woman was saying in accented English, Russian. Sophia realized, "Where is your precious little wife?" "Go fuck yourself, Katerina," Marco spat, and the woman, Katerina, pressed a burning cigarette against his shoulder in response. Marco's grunt of pain was like a knife to Sophia's heart. This bitch was torturing her husband, and she was going to pay for every mark on his skin with her life. "She's right here," Sophia said, stepping into the doorway. Katerina spun toward her, gun raised, but Sophia was already moving. The months of training had honed her instincts to a razor's edge, and she rolled left as Katerina fired, the bullet sparking off the marble floor where she'd been standing. Sophia's return shot took Katerina in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her weapon flying. The Russian woman crashed into Marco's bookshelf with a cry of pain and rage. "You killed my brother," Katerina snarled, clutching her wounded shoulder as she glared at Sophia with venomous hatred. "Vincent was all I had left." "Vincent was a monster who tortured children," Sophia replied coldly, moving closer with her gun trained on the other woman. "And if you're his sister, that makes you a monster too. He was family." Katerina's voice cracked with grief and fury. "You took him from me." "No!" Marco's voice was hoarse but strong as Sophia cut his bonds with quick, efficient movements. "Vincent took himself from you the moment he decided to make war on the Salvatores. Your brother chose death when he came after my wife." Katerina laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her beautiful face. "And now I choose it too. If I can't have my revenge, if I can't make you pay for what you've done, then I'll take you both with me." The grenade in her hand was small, military grade, and very, very real. She'd already pulled the pin. 5 seconds, Katerina whispered, her smile sharp as broken glass. Not even the great Marco Salvatore can outrun an explosion. But Marco was already moving, his powerful body coiled and ready despite his injuries. He tackled Sophia to the ground behind his massive oak desk. Just as Katerina let the grenade drop, the world exploded. When consciousness returned, Sophia found herself buried under debris, her ears ringing, tasting blood and smoke. Marco's weight was heavy across her back, and for one terrible moment she thought he might be dead. Then he groaned, and relief flooded through her with such intensity it brought tears to her eyes. "Marco," she gasped, trying to shift beneath him. "I'm okay," he said roughly, though she could hear the pain in his voice. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so." She managed to turn in his arms, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the smoke. He was pale, covered in dust and debris, but alive. Wonderfully, gloriously alive. Around them, the study was destroyed. Marco's desk had saved their lives, its solid construction absorbing most of the blast. Where Katerina had been standing was now just a smoking crater. "She's dead," Marco said unnecessarily, following her gaze. "Good." The venom in her own voice surprised Sophia. 6 months ago, she would have been horrified by such casual violence. Now, all she felt was satisfaction that the threat to their happiness was eliminated. Marco studied her face, and something in his expression shifted. "You killed the others, didn't you? The men in the hallway." It wasn't really a question. "They came into our home," Sophia said simply. "They hurt you. They threatened us. So I killed them." Marco's kiss was desperate, claiming, full of pride and possession and something deeper than love. "My deadly, beautiful wife," he murmured against her lips. "My queen, my warrior, my everything." "Always," she whispered back. "I'll always fight for you, Marco. I'll always choose you." They made love right there in the ruins of a study, surrounded by smoke and destruction, claiming each other with a desperation born of nearly losing everything. It was raw, primal, the kind of coupling that came from staring death in the face and choosing life instead. Afterward, As sirens wailed in the distance and Marco's surviving security team worked to secure the building, they held each other close and made plans. "We need to disappear for a while," Marco said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare skin. "Let things cool down. Make sure there are no other surprises waiting for us." "Where will we go?" "I have a house in Tuscany. Private, secure, beautiful. We can hide there until it's safe to come back. And then—" Marco's smile was soft, full of promise. "And then we build the life we've earned, the life we've fought for." His hand covered hers, their wedding rings catching the light. "I love you, Mrs. Salvatore. More than power, more than money, more than my own life. I love you too," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they prepared to leave their destroyed penthouse behind, Sophia realized that the scared girl who'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder was gone forever. In her place was a woman who'd found her strength, her purpose, her home in the arms of the most dangerous man in New York. They'd been tested by fire and blood, by enemies and family, by doubt and fear, and the kind of love that could either save or damn them both. They'd survive it all, and they'd emerge stronger. 1 year later, the Tuscan sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as Sophia stood on the terrace of their villa, watching Marco emerge in the vineyard below. The man walking toward her bore little resemblance to the dangerous crime boss she'd married in Vegas. This Marco wore simple jeans and a white linen shirt, his dark hair tousled by the Mediterranean breeze, his storm-gray eyes soft with contentment. But she knew the predator still lurked beneath that peaceful exterior, just as a warrior she become still lived beneath her flowing sundress. "Mrs. Salvatore," Marco called as he climbed the stone steps, a bottle of their own wine in his hand, and that devastating smile playing at his lips. "You look like you're contemplating something dangerous." "Always," Sophia replied with a smile that was pure seduction. "I was thinking about our wedding night, the real one." Tonight marked exactly 1 year since they renewed their vows in a little chapel overlooking the valley, surrounded by olive trees and the scent of wild lavender. No Elvis impersonator this time, just a centuries-old priest who blessed their union in Latin and Italian, making it sacred in ways that went beyond mere legality. Marco set the wine aside and pulled her into his arms, his hands settling at her waist with familiar possessiveness. "Which wedding night? The one where you were too drunk to remember, or the one where you nearly killed me with pleasure?" "Both," Sophia murmured against his throat, breathing in the scent that had become home to her. "But especially the second one." The memory was still vivid. How they'd made love on silk sheets scattered with rose petals. How Marco had worshipped her body like she was a goddess. How they claimed each other with a desperation born of surviving held together. She'd worn white lace that night, traditional and pure, but there had been nothing innocent about the way he'd torn from her body with reverent hands. "You're blushing," Marco observed, his thumb tracing her heated cheek. "After everything we've done together, everything we've shared, you still blush when you think about our wedding night." "It's your fault," she accused breathlessly. "The way you look at me, like you want to devour me whole." "I do." His voice dropped to that whiskey timbre that still made her knees weak. "Every single day for the rest of our lives, I want to strip you naked and remind you exactly why you chose to stay with a monster like me." "You're not a monster," Sophia said fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt. "You're my husband, my partner, my everything." The words were truth, absolute and unshakable. The past year in Tuscany had shown her sides of Marco she'd never imagined. The man who brought her coffee in bed every morning, who taught her to tend the vines with patient hands, who held her when she woke from nightmares about blood and explosions. He'd stepped away from the family business completely, passing control to his most trusted lieutenant, while they built a new life far from the violence of New York. But sometimes in moments like this, she could see the hunger in his eyes, the need to claim and possess that would never be fully civilized. "Dance with me," Marco said suddenly, extending his hand with old-world gallantry. There was no music save for the evening breeze through the olive trees, but Sophia took his hand anyway, letting him pull her close. They swayed together on the terrace as the sun disappeared behind the hills, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. "I have something for you," Marco murmured against her ear. "It's not my birthday." It's the anniversary of the day I realized I was completely, irrevocably in love with you. His hand slipped into his pocket, emerging with a small velvet box. The day I knew I'd rather die than live without you. Sophia's breath caught. Her wedding ring was already perfect. The massive diamond he'd placed on her finger during their drunken Vegas ceremony, surrounded now by a band of smaller stones he'd added for their real wedding. She couldn't imagine what else he might give her. Inside the box was a necklace unlike anything she'd ever seen. The pendant was a single perfect teardrop diamond surrounded by smaller stones, suspended from a platinum chain so delicate it looked like captured starlight. "Marco, it's beautiful, but—" "Look closer," he said softly. She lifted the pendant to catch the last rays of sunlight and gasped. Hidden within the diamond's facets, visible only at the perfect angle, was an engraving so tiny she had to squint to read it. "Forever yours, MS." The diamond came from a mine my great-grandfather owned in South Africa, Marco explained, his voice rough with emotion. The setting was designed by the same artisan who made my mother's wedding ring. And the engraving, he smiled, boyish and vulnerable. "I did that myself, with tools I probably had no business using." Tears blurred her vision as she touched the pendant with reverent fingers. "You made this for me?" "I made it for us. For the woman who saved my life, my soul, my fucking sanity." His hands cupped her face, thumbs wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "For the wife who chose to love a monster, who fought beside me, who made me believe in happy endings." Sophia couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat, so she kissed him instead, pouring everything she felt into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she turned so he could fasten the necklace around her throat. The weight of it was perfect, like it had been made specifically for her, which she realized it had. "I love you," she whispered, her fingers tracing the pendant. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "Show me," Marco said, echoing the words she'd spoken to him a year ago. This time, she didn't hesitate. She took his hand and led him inside, through the villa's cool stone hallways to their bedroom. Moonlight streamed to the open windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. Marco's hands were reverent as he undressed her, his fingers tracing the curves he'd mapped 1,000 times before. The sundress pooled at her feet, followed by scraps of lace that left her wearing nothing but his necklace and the wedding ring that had started it all. "My wife," he breathed, his voice breaking with worship. "My beautiful, deadly, perfect wife." When he lifted her onto their bed, the same bed where they consummated their real marriage, where they'd made love through thunderstorms and lazy Sunday mornings, Sophia felt complete in a way that went beyond mere physical satisfaction. This was coming home. This was finding the missing piece of her soul. Their lovemaking was slow, reverent, a celebration of everything they'd survived and everything they'd built together. Marco worshipped her body with hands and mouth that knew exactly how to drive her to the edge of sanity, while she gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. When release finally claimed them, it was with a shattering intensity that left them both gasping, clinging to each other as if they could merge into one being. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled in silk sheets with the Mediterranean breeze cooling their heated skin, Marco traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Sophia considered the question seriously. A year ago, she'd been a broke waitress with crushing debt and no prospects. Now she was the wife of a reformed crime boss, living in paradise with a man who loved her beyond reason. She'd killed people, seen violence that would give most people nightmares, and traded her innocence for a love that burned brighter than the sun. "Only one," she said finally. Marco tensed beside her. "What?" She smiled, wicked and full of promise. "I regret that I can't go back and fall asleep on your shoulder again. Just experience that first moment of knowing I was exactly where I belonged." His laughter was rich and warm as he pulled her closer. "We have the rest of our lives to create new moments like that. Promise?" "I promise," Marco said solemnly, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted of wine and forever. "Until my last breath, until the stars burn out, until the world ends, you're mine and I'm yours." Looking into his storm-gray eyes, feeling the solid warmth of his body beneath hers, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that some love stories were worth every drop of blood, every moment of terror, every sacrifice they demanded. Their story had begun with a chance encounter on a red-eye flight to Vegas. It had been tested by violence, family, enemies who wanted to destroy them both. But it had emerged stronger, truer, eternal. As Marco made love to her again under the Tuscan stars, his whispered endearments mixing with her breathless moans, Sophia closed her eyes and let herself fall. Just like that first night on the plane, she was falling into the unknown. But this time, she knew exactly where she would land. In the arms of the man who had taught her that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only one worth making. Forever his, forever theirs, forever burning bright against the darkness they'd left behind.